just about kick off, but just hope everyone's got a cup of coffee, cup of tea, sitting back, relaxing, but not too much relaxing because it's an interactive session. We want your comments, we want your questions, your thoughts, your ideas. That's what makes the session. So feel free. I've joined a few of these in the past, and I know what makes the session is really getting that buzz on that chat box. So please, no question is a silly question, and no idea is a silly idea. So do flood that chat box. We are on record, so just a heads up for anyone, and I'll keep just letting people in. So the session's kicking off at 10, and I'm just, absolutely thrilled. I will kick off now. It's 2 minutes past, and we're up to an incredible number. So thank you for everybody for joining this morning. Absolutely delighted to welcome Georgia. It's the first time I've met Georgia, and I think she's going to be a really inspirational lady. So massive thank you to your time. Really inspiring guest and really inspiring topic of changing lanes that's really close to my heart, and I think really relevant in today's workforce. So great session. And Georgia, you can just see, Georgia's come along to share with us she's a real role model for challenging that traditional linear upwards career trajectory, achieving clearly, just looking at, Georgia, what she, her just looking at her CV and what she's been through, incredible success from just working across multiple functions, from finance, sales, and more recently shopper marketing, which she'll talk through. But you can clearly see from today's session, Georgia is going to show that progress doesn't just exist in that single lane, and how through changing lanes have had huge benefits in terms of career progression, personal development, and even just satisfaction at work. So absolutely thrilled to be joined by Georgia Firth, Head of Shopper Marketing at Red Bull. So I'll hand over to you, Georgia.
I mean, firstly, thank you for that introduction. I feel like I need that level of hype in all my quarterly reviews and any meetings that I then go into before I go in and present. That was much nicer than I think I probably deserved or was expecting. So thank you so much. Yeah, super excited to be joining this today and talk a little bit about I guess my career. I have got a slide and I'll take you through it, and we'll go through some builds alongside. So this is where we really find out how technology can either work with you or let you down. But hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep, we can see it.
That's great. Amazing news. So yeah, as kind of Melanie's already kind of done a much better job than I would ever be able to do in introducing myself, but I would like to introduce myself. So I'm Georgia. I head up the shopper marketing team here at Red Bull, and I've been with Red Bull now for actually just over 8 years. I think about last week I think I hit my 8-year anniversary, which is bonkers because I still think I am the 23-year-old that I was when I first started, and arguably at times probably still act like it. But yeah, been at Red Bull now for 8 years, and I've been asked to kind of, I guess, join today. So I guess talk a little bit about my career journey so far, which isn't probably the most linear career journey so far. I think we talk a lot about, squiggly careers and changing lanes and all the other different ways to kind of talk about it. But I thought I'd start at the beginning, and with a very young 18-year-old version of myself that was straight out of sixth form, and if I'm being completely honest, not really knowing what the hell it is I wanted to do when I grew up. Not that I consider myself by any means a grown-up now, but I think you know what I mean. And I'd actually decided to take the year and go and work for a local business. So I didn't go straight to university when I finished my A-levels. I decided to go and kind of get my head around, I guess, what this whole working life looked like. So I started working at an aerospace company called Surrey Satellite. They were based in Guildford, which is where I am originally from, live in London now, so not too far away from Surrey, which my parents I think are happy about. But and I worked across 3 different functions when I worked there. So I worked across the procurement team, the commercial team, and the finance team. And I think it really allowed me to discover 2 main things. I think it was that I really enjoyed working on the finance side of things. I think that was a new area that you didn't really learn at school. But it also definitely opened my eyes to the fact that I was definitely not ready to be working full time yet. And that actually made the call for me that I wanted to go and study and go to university. So I decided to go to De Montfort University in Leicester to study accounting and finance, which I absolutely loved. And it kind of gave me the opportunity to develop my business skills, my math skills, and open me up, and so I could learn more than I thought I ever would do. And actually, a great thing about that course, and something that I found truly to be valuable for me before I even really started my career, was that it gave me the opportunity to have a placement year. So I decided that I wanted to go and do that, and I wanted to make the most of it. And I was extremely fortunate to be able to be offered a role at the Walt Disney Company, where they're based in Hammersmith. I spent around, I think, 15 months working in their financial planning team for their licensed toys business, and the London office itself looks after the whole of EMEA. And at the time, that kind of role looked after all their toys that kind of fell outside the traditional Disney stores. I don't even know if Disney stores still exist these days, but they were pretty iconic when I was growing up. Um, and I was very lucky to get this. As I guess not only was working at a company like Disney exactly as you would imagine, characters walking around everywhere, meeting rooms based off different films. Um, but it actually opened me to a new world of finance, and something that I think you don't really get taught at university. And it was outside from that traditional accounting role, which I think is probably the more linear one when people do think about studying accounting. But it also made me realize that I really enjoyed working for a brand. And that then became, I guess, starting to pull these bits together around, okay, what are my motivational factors? What is it that I like? And I enjoyed working for a big one, especially as big as Disney. So that kind of then set me up going into what would be, I guess, going back to my final year of university. And it was at that point that I then started at Red Bull. I think that was around 6 weeks after my final exam. And that's probably where I guess my career has really started. I joined Red Bull as a commercial finance analyst, or a financial controller, depending, I guess, on what different business is calling it. And I work specifically on the on the go channel, which for us at Red Bull is, I guess, everything from driving, travel, high street, value retail, and new business. And if I'm honest, I was kind of a bit blown away that companies like Red Bull actually existed. It was full of young, fun, high achieving individuals, and it had a bar in its office. So for me, I'm like, straight out of university, is this what the real world actually looks like? And I still think it's kind of probably what's kept me here so far today. Not the bar, but the company like Red Bull. But the bar does definitely help. Um, so yeah, and it's definitely, like I said, it was what kept me here for all this time. But I think, like anything, any role and any transition, I think it has its challenges. And I think particularly when you're young, and I was 23 years old, I think you're kind of at an age where you're so volatile to whatever it is that comes your way. You think every decision you make is the biggest decision you're ever going to make in your whole entire life. You think you have to have your whole world mapped out, and then any barriers that come your way you think are going to completely overcome you. And actually, after my first 6 months at Red Bull, I guess my first proper job, um, our team of 6 actually became a team of 2, with 4 of the team members deciding to leave or to go progress different roles internally within the business. So I really tried to not take it personally, but I was the only newbie that had come into the team for a while, so it probably was my fault. But I think with losing 2/3, of a team, it has its impact. And actually, me still being relatively new, I think I'd be lying if I didn't say this was tough. For those of you that aren't aware, I guess finance departments have certain periods throughout the year where your workload really ramps up, whether that be around your planning cycles, your business plans, your month-end close, your volume lock forecast. All of these different areas are these snapshots throughout the period. And actually, God, I remember it so clearly. We were going into our business planning cycle right at this exact moment, 4 people down. The hours were long. I think there's a picture of 3 a.m. there on the screen. That was absolutely no exaggeration at that moment. It was super tough. Like I said, I was really young, and I think I thought, God, is this what working's like? Because I don't know. This is what I signed up for. And the workload was intense. I went from kind of just looking after this on the go channel to trying having to navigate my way through the total on and off premise sales functions within Red Bull. But probably to this day, and if I'm completely honest with myself, I think I probably learned more in this period of time than I did across my whole 4 years at university. And I think that's definitely a real testament to how work experience and overcoming issues, and I guess being versatile to your dynamics and your surroundings, really does allow you to learn more than you ever have done. I think we have a big thing at Red Bull around kind of your development and your learning model, where it's like 70% of your learning is done on the job, 20% of it is done via feedback, and actually 10% of it is that formal learning and that formal training. And I think I really lent into that 70% in that moment. But look, there started to be light at the end of the tunnel. I think, vacancies in any role, they get filled. Sometimes it takes 3 months, sometimes it takes a month, depends on all those fun notice period games all hiring managers, I'm sure, can relate to. And normality resumed. I was now kind of the finance business partner for the Impulse team, so our wholesale channel and our convenience channel, alongside our wider customer marketing functions. And I think at this point, it gave me a bit of breathing time. And it actually gave me a bit of time to start thinking about, okay, my development. Where is it that I want to go, and what is it that I want my career to look like? And I say the word my development and my career because I really am a strong believer that the emphasis on your own development and the emphasis on your own career does lie with you. I think it's something that kind of has always been instilled in me, in the sense of you can always only run your own perfect race, and you're the one that's kind of in control of what that looks like. And at this point, I decided to kind of come up with, I guess, what is my development plan. And I started to really think about where it was that I wanted to end up. And at this point, for me, I wanted to have a career in finance and revenue management. But I definitely had the mindset, and I had the ability to be self-aware that I was by no means, I guess, the finished article or the finished product at this point. So I really wanted to gain an understanding, I guess, of what it was like to work on the other side of the desk, the people that I'm giving this guidance to on their pricing and their promotional strategy. What is it like to do their job, so I can give them the best guidance and the best advice? So I spoke to my manager at the time, and actually at the time, a guy called Daniel Ryan, who's worked with us for a very long time, but worked at Nestle previously before then, and he was head of wholesale at the time. And I kind of took them through my development plan, and I thought, like, these are my thoughts. I want to gain this exposure and I want to close these gaps. And actually, fortunately, that kind of coincided at the same time as a vacancy within Dan's team and the Impulse team. And that kind of then allowed me to move into, I guess, the next phase of my career and the next phase of my journey, which was moving over to the Impulse team. Now, I've included on the left-hand side, which have been there the whole time, I guess, my top 5 talents. For those, I guess, people have different ones in the organizations they work with. At Red Bull, a big part of our philosophy is the Clifton strengths, but I know people use the colours or Myers-Briggs, or they have their own version, I guess, of that profiling. Now, for someone that worked in finance, these top 5 talents, I can assure you, were not common. And for those that are wondering what WiW is, it's winning others over. It doesn't just mean I like to have a party. But these really were not common whatsoever. The rest of my team, they had analytical, strategic, futuristic. And I kind of thought at the time, mine were just a little bit fluffy. Really people focused, and I over-indexed in relationship building. But I think little did I know what I was about to be going into in the world of wholesale and the world of convenience, that actually, these talents I could really kind of turn into strengths moving into a sales role. with absolutely no sales experience. So I worked as an NAE within the Impulse team for probably around 18 months. And I had the privilege of working with the likes of Bestway, Demetra and Costco over that time. I absolutely loved this role. I think it got me out from behind my desk and Excel and out to meeting people, out to visiting depots, visiting stores, visiting head office, kind of having a real different approach and landscape. I had been quite fortunate that I think within my roles before, and because I'd expressed my interest within finance, they let me come along to some customer meetings, so it wasn't completely daunting, and I didn't, kind of know what that situation looked like. But again, that was all with being transparent in terms of where it was that I wanted to end up and what it was that I wanted my career to look like. And I then kind of had this moment and I had this thought where I was like, okay, well, whilst I'm over here, whilst I'm no longer sitting in my finance seat, and while I'm no longer looking at the P&L every second of the day, although don't get me wrong, I think there's a misconception that people in sales don't do that. They definitely do that. They do that a lot of the time. But I kind of thought, whilst I'm here, what else can I learn? What else will make me more well-rounded when I eventually go back into this role within finance? So I kind of bricked up that development plan once more. And I started to look at, I guess, the breadth that I could gain and the knowledge that I could learn. And if it meant I needed to take a sidestep to be able to do it, that was definitely something I was going to do. I think at this point I was like 24, 25 years old, and you're like kind of in that moment, well, I'm working for the rest of my life. So I'm here to try and gain as much as it is that I can in this moment. And I decided to kind of sit down with my manager again and go through the different vacancies and the different roles that were out there. And I was extremely fortunate again that the business were willing to take a punt on me in an area that I had no experience in. And I moved into a role within shopper marketing. Now, for me, I was particularly excited about this. I think I was going to be learning, getting trade marketing experience. I was going to be increasing my exposure to the wider marketing functions in the marketing department, which you can imagine at a brand like Red Bull is super exciting. And there's so many different areas that you could explore and go into. And I actually was quite excited to be going back to an office-based job. I know that kind of feels like a bit of a taboo and almost a swear word post-lockdown. And I appreciate it isn't for everyone. But for me, that was something I was really excited about. And I think there's definitely something to be said about the culture of a team when everyone is all together every day, running ideas past each other. And actually, at times, a Red Bull can feel like you're just hanging out with your friends. But bearing in mind, this was at a time before Microsoft Teams was even a thing. I think we had a really awful, clunky version called WebEx back then, which would not have stood the test of time over the years that came. But then COVID did hit. And I actually found myself in a brand new role, in a brand new team, working from my kitchen table. Now, don't get me wrong, I was still able to kind of gain exposure and learn all those areas that I wanted to learn and continue to do all those things. But I think you've seen the picture there, trying to sell chillers into Tesco from my lounge was far from ideal and not quite the process I thought that was going to be. But I'm sure everyone had their own working from home challenges over the last 2 years, and appreciate Mel's even got some today, so I know that it's still a very much live topic. But we got through it, and then it kind of got to that point where I was then thinking, okay, I've done some key account experience, I've taken a bit of a sidestep, gone into a similar level role within the shopper marketing function, but what was it I wanted to do next, and how am I going to start to elevate my career, and how am I going to start to have some of these big picture and big level conversations. And I really wanted to ramp up my commercial exposure and have more strategic, high level commercial decision making, and actually really start to develop new skills. And one of which I particularly wanted to kind of gain was people management. So I got myself a mentor internally at Red Bull. I would recommend mentors to anyone. They're super valuable, and they're essentially an advocate for you within kind of the management team and conversations. They are exposed to more things than you know about. They've had different journeys than you have, and they're able to kind of lean upon their own different experiences. And we started kind of, taking some time sitting and working together and trying to understand what the right next step for me would be, and then how I could try and, gain that people management experience in my current role. And I became a mentor for more junior members of staff, so I could kind of start to work on some of those leadership skills. And it led to essentially then, I guess, a national account management role, which was my previous role before the one I'm currently in. And that was for, I guess, buying groups and the world of independent wholesale. And for any of those that are on this call, I cannot stress how much I loved this job. Absolutely loved this job. I think the customers, the fast pace, the people management, I think for me, this role really changed my course. This role kind of made me think that I actually don't think I want to go back to finance anymore. It kind of gave me this moment in time where I was like, I love doing this. And it actually opened my eyes to organizations such as the FWD, Women in Wholesale. And it was thanks to, the great manager that I had at the time that encouraged me to sign up for the Future Leaders Forum, which the FWD run, which was amazing for me in terms of networking, and actually is probably how I was invited to doing this in the first place. Lindsay's been a great advocate and support in allowing me to kind of get that exposure. And actually, for me, I was having more versatile conversations. I was having the fund price increase conversations. I was going through a world of everyone was post-COVID and back to the world of reality, and there was its own challenges within that. And like I said, I got to become a people manager, and I think for me that's something I found extremely rewarding. And it's probably been one of my highlights so far in my career is actually seeing someone that worked for me then go on to be my successor when I left this role. And that was something that I was particularly proud of, and I was extremely proud of how his career has then gone on to progress. And actually that kind of then, I guess, opened my eyes to thinking, okay, I like this people management thing. This is something I'm really getting a new level of energy and buzz out of. And it allowed me to then move on to my current role, which I guess went from managing a team of 1 to a team of 8. And I moved back over to the shopper marketing team. And they'd actually in that moment decided to restructure, and they'd upweighted it, and I was very fortunate enough to get additional headcount signed off so I could start to kind of shape a role in terms of the way that it looked like. And actually this role has given me its own challenges, but I think it's exposed me to all other different areas across the business. I think I got quite safe within my wholesale world, and I still think of wholesale as probably where I enjoy the most, but I definitely had got super comfortable, and I think that's largely down to the people that you work with within the channel. But it gave me kind of the responsibility in terms of how our brand shows up in store. Kind of mentioned how fortunate it is working for a brand like Red Bull with all the different marketing functions. And then I had the ability to try and translate to what that looks like in store. And that kind of gave me a new sense of pride in the brand. And don't get me wrong, I still have to overcome challenges, such as if anyone has the fun pleasure of working with, things like customer design standards, processes and guidelines and all these things, the world of digital tower ends and retail media, and how do we make our equipment to be more sustainable in the ever evolving world. And this has definitely been probably one of my biggest challenges in terms of role. And I think it's kind of navigating through the day job, but also managing a team of 8. And I want to give every single person in the team the exact same amount of time, and I want them to be most of my time. But there's obviously that annoying thing like a day job that can get in the way in between. But leveling up for me from 1 to 8 was definitely a big challenge, and I don't think I was prepared for it, but it's one that I'm absolutely loving, and I'm still kind of going with it and trying to make the most of it all. And I think I was trying to kind of think, this kind of takes me to where I am now in my role. And I was trying to kind of think, right, okay, if there was any kind of lasting things that I would recommend for anyone, or how's the right way to finish this? I guess for me, I think what's been pivotal is having a plan and creating that plan and deciding where it is I wanted to end up, and actually taking all of those key stakeholders on a journey. Again, I cannot stress more the importance of mentors, having advocates and allies with across the business to help you navigate through your career. I think anyone that says they know exactly what they want to do when they grow up is lying. If anyone that knows exactly where they want their career to finish right now is lying, I think everyone's still navigating through it. But I think when you're young and you're starting, you seem to think everyone around you has got it all figured out. they haven't. And it can be a little bit daunting and overwhelming. And I think my advice to anyone would be, don't be afraid to move away from the conventional route, because you might end up enjoying it. And actually, in a role like myself, I think you might end up completely changing your lane completely. I appreciated the wave at the end that came there. But no, yeah, I think that's kind of everything from me and my side. But yeah, I think my advice to anyone, yeah, like I said, is have a plan, continue to evolve it, and make sure you're bringing all the right people on that journey with you.
Absolutely amazing, Georgia. We have had a late addition to the group, which is Sophie. So well done for just keeping it going. Apologies for that. So there's so much there, Georgia. But one thing that just really, really strikes me when you speak, and I would say I don't know if other people are feeling it on the group, but yeah, and love that, Georgia, getting some great comments. But you really strike me as somebody who does know what they want. They are focused, they are clear on the fact that development is something within their own control, something that they have to drive. Where do you think that came from? Just having that kind of single-minded approach to your development, where do you think that came from? What inspired you?
I think as an individual, I've probably always been quite determined. And I think probably my parents would probably testified to that even as a child. And it was probably very annoying and irritating at that point. But I think, I've always kind of known that I want to go and do, as opposed to I don't want to be a spectator in my own life. I very much want to go and drive and be the person that's going to go and make the change and do the things that I want to do. I think I've been fortunate to surround myself with a network that's allowed me to do it. And I think I'm very fortunate that whether that be my friendship group outside of work, my family, or all the people that I work with, they're very much hyping you up as opposed to bringing you down. I think there's definitely something to be said within that as well. Surround yourself with good people. But I think that's definitely allowed me to kind of have confidence in my determination. I think it's changed a lot, and I think my confidence has grown. I think if you asked me, or if I did this session 5 years ago, I'd be a very different person. I'd be saying it very differently, and I would still be thinking I was going to go back into my commercial finance role once upon a time. So I think that has evolved, and I think that's evolved with experience, but I also think that's evolved with the different elements of challenges that you overcome across with your work, and then your priorities start to change, and that's where your plan starts to adapt, and you kind of have to adapt with it.
Absolutely, and the key things I got from what you talked about is that the ownership first and foremost, hence why that was my first question. I talk to a lot of people, even in my own teams, to try and help them understand it. It's not something that you've got to wait for that next job opportunity, or that next project or something to fall into your lap. There is a lot of it that you've got to really drive forward, and particularly in these sort of very tough economic times where teams are leaner fundamentally. There's lots of change, and also depending on size, you work at huge companies such as Red Bull with a wealth of opportunity, but there may be some people on the call that are maybe in smaller companies, SMEs, startups, and it's all about actually really owning that development and taking those opportunities that may be but rather than being dependent on the next role, dependent on the next title, the next paycheck, for example. So, but your real ownership, and then that whole piece around flipping the script. So again, I remember when I had my first few roles, and it was very much focusing on the development areas, focusing on your weaknesses. And I love the fact that you talk about focusing on your strengths. Where did that sort of come about? Is that something that Red Bull has really helped you focus on? Where's that kind of flipping of the script
Yeah, very much so. I think it was kind of quite eye-opening, and I think it took me a minute to kind of get my head around it when I joined Red Bull. I think you're kind of I guess programmed when you grow up being like, these are the things you're good at, these are the things you're not good at. You need to work on the things that you're not good at to get them to the same level as the things that you're good at. But actually, I think you tend to find the things that you're good at are the things you enjoy the most, and things, if you enjoy it the most, you're going to give it your most time, and you're going to give it your most energy. And I think that when I came into Red Bull and they had this strengths philosophy, and I was like, huh? I thought we all had to make ourselves a better person and work on the things that we didn't know what we were doing. But then having that mindset of, it's like, actually, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think as long as there's no fundamental flaws in the things you can't go, I think everyone's got to have a basic level of competence in the things you need to do your job. I don't think Rebel are advocates of that. But I think, it's having that ability to focus on the things you're good at, and actually knowing that people will be more energized, knowing people will be more motivated when they're working on the things they can do, and when they're in roles where they can develop those and take those to a next level further. I think some of them I'm still in the process of mastering. I think there's always room to grow in absolutely anything, and it actually creates, and I would recommend anyone to do it. You can kind of go on to Clifton Strengths yourselves and do the profile, but it creates you your own unique report. And I thought, oh, surely if everyone that has positivity has got the same blurb as mine does for positivity, it doesn't. They have all their own unique ones. And I honestly swear every time I go in and read it, I read a different line that I didn't know was in there before. And I think it's because you're in a different phase in your life and you're interpreting it completely differently. But I would really recommend the Clifton Strengths to anyone if they haven't done them. It's been game changing for me, I think, inside of work and outside of work. I think it's helped me kind of develop my relationships more internally and externally. And I think it's something that, it creates a positive mindset. It kind of has that ricochet onto the rest of the people. And I think it is also why people end up staying at Red Bull for as long as they do, because they're super engaged, they're super motivated, and they're doing things they love and the things they're good at, which definitely helps.
Yeah, clearly a great company who is endorsing this kind of development. Is there, and it leads me quite nicely onto any employers, any sort of HR representatives, line managers who are on the call, how can they support their team members, their direct reports, those that come to them and say, look, I really want to develop in my role, and actually they might see it as more that linear trajectory, and kind of bringing to life that more changing lanes approach? What are your sort of tips for managers?
I think definitely get to know the individual. I think there's power in getting to know that person is. I think sometimes people can be so much more than what they do and their outputs from a 9 to 5, and it might end up you kind of seeing a spark in them that they didn't know you didn't know was there before. And then I guess probably within hiring manager roles and HR roles, you have a more holistic view of the business and organization, and the different skills and talents that it takes to go and do those roles. I think I've worked with people internally who have done more linear careers. I haven't, but it's not stopped, them getting to where they want to be. It's not stopped me getting to where I want to go. I think it goes back to that point of finding the right people for the right jobs, and I think it's being brave with it. I think take a punt with someone if you see the spark, you see that mindset, you see their emotional intelligence, their ability to adapt and be able to evolve into what you think that role could be. They might not have the perfect CV for it, but if you think they've got those key attributes, I mean, that's where the power of, I guess, of a people manager comes in, where you can kind of work with them and coach and develop them into getting, I guess, the basic understanding and the skill set of the role, and allowing them to then take those sparks that you saw before to take it to a level that you kind of wanted it to get to. I think I'm a firm believer of I think, I don't know if this is also working in wholesale, and definitely when I've been recruiting, it's like I kind of go for the right person as opposed to the right CV. I think the rest of it kind of comes a little bit later down the line, because actually doing one job as a national account manager in one company is very different to doing another job as a national account manager in a different company. And I think it's all about having that right person, and the day job bit is teachable. You can teach that. That's not a problem, but you need to have the right attitude to get you there in the first place.
Yeah, definitely for our industry as well. I feel like it's all people, relationships, and you can be the best person at finance in the world, but like, no disrespect here, clearly your background is finance, but you clearly having the people attributes, and isn't that almost in a way a great build on that? Is another benefit of doing those kind of job rotations, having those different placements, because that in itself is, yes, it's broadening your skill set, but it's maybe broadening out your skill set that you might not have just found in that single, that specific subject area, that specific topic department.
Completely, because also those roles might not have allowed you to. Like, I think if I'd kind of stayed working in finance, I might not have really leveraged my relationship building skills. Do you know what I mean? I might not have lent into some of those other areas in terms of working with other people, because I was probably still stuck on the month-end closes 4 days after the month finishes, that takes me on to the volume lock cycle that then goes me through to the pre-month then close, and then goes through to the next planning cycle, and then you just rinse and repeat and you go again for the rest of the year, which is a small insight to anyone that doesn't work in finance. But you wouldn't have done it, and I think I probably wouldn't have known that I got so much energy from it if I hadn't changed roles and changed careers, because I would have just stuck to the thing that, textbook told me I was supposed to when I finished school. Oh, you're good at maths and you studied business studies, you should probably do accounting and finance. But you don't get the opportunity to develop some of those other softer skills in those moments, in those kind of key set pieces, do you? But you only get that from work experience.
Exactly, and I think an area that maybe Georgia, you do yourself a bit of a disservice on, because you've talked about your career and what you've learned, but you now, is it right that you lead a team of 7?
Yeah, bonkers. If I still feel like I'm a child, who's done that to me? That's so stupid.
But that's absolutely incredible, because again, I don't think you necessarily, I don't know about anyone else on the call, but when I became a line manager, nobody sort of sat down and went, right, here's the textbook, here's how you deal with all the HR issues, how you deal with people, how you inspire people. And it's that natural progression. And I just, again, would you say a lot of that is driven by your exposure to different functions and the career trajectory that you've taken?
Yeah, I think definitely the exposure to different functions gave you probably more holistic a view in terms of giving advice, in terms of decision making and day job and execution. I think there's definitely probably we do things like managers masterclasses, but it definitely I didn't think I knew they existed before I took a role within people management. But there's definitely something around, learning how people work with people, and that ego mindset kind of mentality of like, parent v child, and peer and peer, and there's definitely some kind of elements around that, and knowing that despite the fact that you're a manager, you are just talking to an individual who was also probably once upon a time, and wants to go and do their own thing, their own journey. And I think it's having that, I guess, ability to kind of empathize and know that they want to get there. And I think as a role within a people manager is thinking, how can I help them? I think that's definitely something that, due to how fortunate I had been with having great people managers and great advocates internally in business, I kind of feel a bit of a moral responsibility to ensure that I'm enabling other people to be able to kind of do the same in whatever way or whatever, whether that's linear or more squiggly route to get there. I do definitely feel a responsibility of doing that, because I think if I hadn't had those advocates in the business, I certainly wouldn't be doing the job that I'm doing now. And I think that's probably one for anyone who kind of has had the privilege to get to where they are. I think the minute you get to kind of a position where you have any slight power, what you do with it is super, super important.
So it sounds like an amazing journey. I'm going to flip it slightly and focus on, come on then, it can't have been all plain sailing. What might have you done differently? What are some of the speed bumps?
Yeah, I think working in finance definitely took its toll on me. I think it did. Like I said to you before, it was very challenging. But I think probably the biggest, I put a lot of pressure on myself. I think it's probably something I still do a little bit now. I think, to your point before, I am quite a determined person, and therefore I think my standards then become quite high in terms of what that looks like. And I think I have put a lot of pressure on myself that when I'm doing something, that if I'm not continuously learning, if I'm not continuously ready for the next thing or focusing on what that needs to be, or I kind of then think I need to be, what's next. And I think it probably wasn't actually until I did my previous role that I kind of had that moment where I was like, I'm actually enjoying this. And it's a weird thing to say, because obviously I love what I do. I love working at Red Bull. It's amazing. But you do have those moments in the time a year where you're like, okay, I've done this now. I should be doing the next thing. What's that going to be like? And I did that role, and I was like, this is what it's like to fully just be enjoying and just, doing a role that you feel really like you love, and you love the people, and it's challenging you in the right way, which doesn't feel forced or doesn't feel like I'm having to be the driving force behind it and I'm having to be 100 miles an hour with my own career. But I think I definitely, like I said, I put pressure on myself. I think I wanted to do the next thing and do the next thing as best as I possibly could do. I wouldn't say I was kind of competitive with anyone else. I was just competitive with myself. And I think that definitely is a drainer in terms of your energy and your headspace, I would definitely say. But that comes with experience. I think, like I said, you put pressure on yourself when you're younger to know exactly what it is you want to do when you grow up, and then you realize when you grow up that no one else knows that yet either. But I think, yeah, that comes from time.
Yeah. And so on that note, talking about sort of like not being too hard on yourself, taking it step by step, for those on the call that they do want to diversify their role, they want to develop their role, maybe change their role, what would be that, but maybe lacking some of the confidence or where to start? What would be your kind of top tip, your sort of number one thing just to get them to make that first move?
I would say learn about the other roles in the business. I think sometimes you can get stuck with just working with the immediate functions that you work with and you surround yourself with, but you aren't aware of different roles or different positions, or you're aware of the positions, but you aren't aware of what their roles and responsibilities are. Your amazing HR team probably has a catalogue of job specs and, key requirements for all different roles that they are within the business.
Yeah.
Start there. I think you then can go through job specs and you think, oh, that sounds quite exciting, or this is super exciting. I didn't know that that's what that role entailed, or I didn't know that that's what they were doing, or that's what they're learning from it. And then be curious. Like, put time in with that line manager, put time in with someone that's doing that job. Like, do you like your job? What does it look like? What does your 9 to 5 look like? What's your monthly rhythm? What's your cycle? Does that work for you in your current life and where you are within your, out of work and where you want to be? So I definitely think just be curious, but ask a lot of questions. I think that's the power of questioning is super, super important.
I think that's great advice. And just looking at some of the questions that we've got on the chat here, specific one from Crystal. Georgia, do you have an opinion about the type of mentorship, i.e. finding someone internal or external level of seniority, such as a few roles above or much further ahead?
I think there's power in both. I have had both. And I think it really depends. And for me, I knew I wanted to stay at Red Bull. I think that part I was super clear on when going, I guess, through this process is I knew I wanted to stay there. So therefore, I really saw the power of internal mentorship, because I guess for me, I was thinking two birds with one stone. I'm going to learn about different area. I'm going to get advice from someone in a role that's got more experience than I do. But that's also could then become another advocate for you within the business, and another spokesperson for you within the business. This person's really focusing on their development. They want to close these skill gaps, etc., etc. It's kind of just one other person talking about you in those fun people review sessions, which also no one tells you about until you become a people manager as well. But I think there is power in learning from your peers as well. I've been fortunate enough to work with some great people at Red Bull, and they've done a different route to me. And I think that there's no such thing as just having one mentor. By the way, I think people is like, oh, I've got a mentor, I'm set. One mentor is definitely not enough. And I think as you change through your career, who that mentor is should also change too. And I think there's power in peer-on-peer feedback and peer-on-peer review, because I think sometimes they're probably a bit more honest. And I think there's also power in finding someone in a senior position who's got more experience, done a few more years than you do, that tells you to calm down, stop putting so much pressure on yourself and just enjoy your job, is definitely something that I found super, super valuable. So I wouldn't say don't just find one and stick to it. I think there's ways to have mentorship within both.
Yeah. There's almost a bit of a stigma that when you get, maybe if you're lucky enough, I've been in companies where you've almost been assigned a mentor, whether you've been part of like a leadership scheme or a training scheme, and actually you've not got on with them, or it's not been quite the right fit. Or you've had, and actually, I think there's a bit of a taboo to almost kind of pause and go, do you know what? This isn't quite working for me. And I think people need to be a little bit brave, because I've definitely had mentors in the past that hasn't been, and nothing wrong with the specific relationship, but it's almost just not at the right time as well. It's all about timing. So back to your point, that's the benefit of having multiple mentors and network, because actually if you're thinking about taking a new role or thinking about taking either in the business or externally, I think that's a really scary time, right? You're often really going over it in your head, and actually having that wider network and those different mentors that you can call on to actually play around with some of the ideas, assess the pros and cons. But it's just that taboo that it's about the right mentor at the right time, having that mix, and it's all back to that the power of the network. Um, Anytime, I'm conscious of time. I just want to make sure if there's any other. We're getting lots of comments about Georgia's presentation. Thank you, really positive, really inspiring. Loving all the tips. I'm definitely going to be looking at Clifton's strengths. Is that something that's accessible to everyone, Georgia?
Yeah,
Clifton's
you can just
strengths.
go online. You can do the questionnaire yourself. It's really weird. You try and think on. I definitely remember when I started it, I was like, oh my God, I was day one at Red Bull. I need to put across the best version of myself in this. And I tried to be really smart and cheat the system. And then you realize they ask you the same question about 6 different times in 6 different formats, and they're smarter than you are. But it's accessible to everyone. They give you your top 5 strengths, and I think you can then pay a little bit more and unlock your top 34. And it kind of gives you your balconies, your basements of each of them, when you know you're operating at your best, when you know you're operating at your worst. It's super, super exciteful. Clifton Strengths would recommend it to anyone.
Amazing, amazing. I think I'll look for question unless there is. Could you post the link to Clifton Strengths? So
I'm
maybe
sure I
we
can find one. Yeah, I'm
share
sure we can
this.
figure that out.
We can do a bit of multitasking. But look, there's so much there. Any kind of a call for sort of final questions. But really inspired, Georgia. I know the only other topic that we discussed prior to this call, which was more on the side of I've definitely, as a manager and speaking to recruiters when I've been trying to recruit for my team, I've had the comment of, oh, they've moved around quite a lot. Sometimes there is that balance between, yes, getting the diversification in your career through different roles, etc., but also finding that. Do you think it's still necessary for people to stay in roles for a long time and almost kind of earn their stripes and then at a stage go on, or do you think that's just not the case anymore, or is it about finding balance? I don't know. What you had some really good thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think it is about finding balance. I think it's also, we didn't speak about this before. I think there's an element around everyone can be guilty of it, right? You open a CV and you think, oh, that person's been there for that amount of time, and then that amount of time, and then that amount of time. Like, what's that about? But I think it's then having that open-mindedness to understand that people are, first of all, so much more than their CV, by the way. They are literally so much more than that one side of A4 piece of paper that you're really trying to sell yourself on. But there's also having that ability to think that, okay, what has happened in their life, or what path have they gone through in their lives that's meant that's the right thing to do. I think for me, I have done that. I've jumped around, and I think I used the phrase, jack of all trades, master of none earlier. And it definitely is something that I think had a taboo around previously, but something that I actually find a bit of power in. And for me, granted, I appreciate all my moves were within one company, which can feel a little bit different.
Yeah.
But for me, it's then meant that, if I'm now giving advice to my team, I've had exposure in the business planning cycle. I've had exposure in price increase conversations. I've had exposure in negotiation trainings for joint business plans. I've, had exposure in hosting customers and all the different elements that come within it, and then also coming up with a trade marketing plan. So it kind of can give you that more holistic view in terms of advice that you want to give. And I think it's probably just being open-minded, if you are a people manager, to try and find out what their story is before you write someone off.
Yeah, I love that. Finding out what people's story is. It's fantastic because there are so many different paths that people follow now, and particularly for women, having that whole not having that linear career directory, I think that helps particularly a lot of women who have to either take time out for extra study, caring, responsibilities, older generations, younger generation. It gives them that flex. Hugely helpful. We got I think we've got time for one more question on the side here. I hope I get it right. From Crystal, loving Crystal's questions, by the way. Any tips for squiggly careers moving into a new role that is a different function? How do you sell yourself against others who have experience in that function? That's a great question. Any tips for confidence for these kinds of moves? That's a really great question. So how do you compete? How do you give that future line manager that confidence in you versus those other candidates?
I think first of all, I think the word confidence is such an interesting one, because I think anyone that goes into these things has to portray themselves as super confident, but deep down inside is battling the demons and thinking, God, can I actually do this job that I'm going for right now? But there's definitely something around, I guess, owning and, the power in the experience that you do have, because that is almost the thing that differentiates you from someone else going into that function. So for me, going into my first sales role, I guess traditionally, if I was to have done a more linear route going to a national account executive, I might have done a field sales rep role or a regional role to get me there. However, what I did have was P&L experience. I knew how to work out the costings. I knew how to do the maths. And actually, that's something you probably got less exposure to in those more junior sales roles. And that became, I guess, I took what was my experience, which is different to someone else, and made that my power. And showed how I was going to learn to do all the other stuff that they knew that I needed to do to help within the role. But I wasn't shying away from the fact that my role and my route was completely different to theirs. I think if it gets you through, the first initial stage of being able to apply for a job, they already know that you haven't got the experience. So then you're kind of like, well, I've got to lean on the experience that I do have. And how do you make that experience that you do have super relevant and approachable and the right thing for that job you're going to? And then you make the commitment, right? You make the commitment that you're going to learn the other stuff, you're going to figure the rest of it out, and you're the kind of person that wants to go and do that. So I definitely think don't be afraid that your route is different to someone else's, because it also is what makes you different to the other candidates that are going up for those jobs, and there's a power in that.
Amazing. Make it your power is going to be my motto this week, because you said it earlier and it really stuck with me. So thank you. I think everyone will agree on the call. George has been hugely inspirational for today's session. Again, thank you for your contributions at this month's breakfast briefing.
Thank you for having me and letting me talk for what felt like the most part of an hour. And you must all be very ready to hear someone else speak.
No, not at all. I hope I talk on behalf of the group. Massive thank you just from the comments that we're getting in the sidebar. So look, George also called out the power of network, mentorship. I'm going to do a shameless plug for the Women in Wholesale speed networking events and the conference that we hold once a year, led by Elliot, who should have been here today, but bless her, had a clash. So just, seek us out, seek out Women in Wholesale. I know definitely for me, it's been a huge support network, meeting people like Georgia to really support people's career trajectories, depending on which chapter of their life that they're in and what support they need. So a massive thank you. I think we'll close it there, unless I have any final questions or any final thoughts from Georgia before we...
Perfect timing.
On that final note, I think we will close the session. But thank you again, Georgia, for your contributions today. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.